I've fought more wildfires than I can count. People think being a park ranger is all trail maintenance and giving directions to tourists. But when the woods catch, we're the first boots on the ground. I've been on burns where trees exploded like grenades, where flames jumped ridges faster than trucks could follow, where smoke turned noon into midnight. But there's one fire I never talk about on the record. One blaze I can't explain with wind charts or fuel loads. What I saw that night isn't in any training manual. It isn't in any report. And if I'm honest, I sometimes wonder if speaking it aloud will draw it back. The summer of 2016 had been brutal. Weeks of dry heat, no rain, lightning storms dancing across the ridges every night. Pine Hollow Preserve was a tinderbox, and all of us knew it was only a matter of time before something lit up. The call came in just after dusk on a Friday. Multiple strikes had ignited the north slope of Black Ash Ridge. By the time we got there, the fire had already run half a mile, climbing uphill with the wind at its back. It was the kind of fire you don't contain. You just try to steer it, keep it from reaching homes on the far side. We worked through the night. Sawyers cut fire breaks, engines dumped water. Air support hammered the ridge at dawn. But the flames didn't act normal. They moved against the wind sometimes, racing downslope when they should have stalled, circling pockets of unburned ground like hunters driving prey. I'd seen fire do strange things before, tornadoes of flame, crown runs that leap gaps. But this was different. This was deliberate. Around midnight, I was on spotter duty at the edge of the ridge. Smoke rolled thick, stinging my eyes, turning the moon into a dim orange smear. That's when I saw movement inside the fire line. At first I thought it was a tree torching out, bark cracking and limbs falling. But then it stepped forward. It was shaped like a man, but wrong. Taller, broader, with shoulders that flickered as though they were made of shifting embers. Its body was flame, but not formless. The fire clung to bones of blackened ash, ribs glowing red, skull crowned with sparks like a burning mane. Where eyes should have been, there were pits of white fire searing and unblinking. It walked, and the flames bent toward it, feeding it as though the fire itself belonged to it. I froze, breath caught in my mask. The thing stopped at the brake line, tilting its head like it was studying me. Then it lifted one arm, long jagged fingers dripping cinders, and the fire surged. Trees that should have smoldered burst into torching pillars. The heat slammed into me, driving me back. My radio crackled with voices yelling about flare-ups, about spotting embers jumping the line. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My voice was gone, burned out of me by terror. The thing didn't cross. It stood there, framed in the inferno, and for one sick moment I thought it smiled. Then it stepped backward, vanishing into flame, the forest swallowing it whole. I didn't tell anyone. How could I? Hey, boss. I just saw a man made of fire commanding the blaze like a puppet. They'd have pulled me off the line, sent me for a psych eval. So I kept my mouth shut, chalked it up to exhaustion, smoke, stress. But inside I knew what I'd seen. And I knew the fire wasn't just fire anymore. Over the next 48 hours, the blaze grew beyond prediction. Fire models failed. Brakes didn't hold. Crews reported walls of flame appearing where there should have been cold black. A bulldozer operator swore he saw a figure walking through smoke, tall and glowing. But when we pressed him, he clammed up, muttering he must have imagined it. Animals fled in droves, herds of deer crashing through lines of trucks, black bears barreling past camps without a glance at the people. Even the coyotes were gone, their howls replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by the crackle of burning timber. On the third night, I was stationed near the old lookout tower. The blaze had shifted east, and my job was to monitor spot fires creeping toward the base. The air was suffocating, thick with smoke that turned every breath into knives. That's when I heard it, a voice. Not on the radio, not human. Low at first, like the groan of trees collapsing. Then words. Old words, I think, though I couldn't understand them. The sound rolled through the smoke, a chant or a growl vibrating in my chest. I turned, and there it was again. The creature rose from the fire like it had been waiting, its form clearer this time. I could see the way the flames shaped its chest, the way the ash clung to it like armor. And behind it, shadows moved, smaller shapes, crawling things made of sparks and soot trailing in its wake. They writhed in the undergrowth, igniting everything they touched. My knees buckled. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't move. The thing raised both arms this time, and the fire answered. Flames arched upward in a ring, a crown of burning pines that snapped and roared. Sparks filled the air like swarms of fireflies, each one landing as a new blaze. The voice deepened, louder now, carrying through the forest like thunder. And in that voice, for just a second, I thought I heard my name. Something broke in me. I ran, stumbling through smoke, half blind, ears filled with the roar of fire and that terrible chant. I didn't stop until I collapsed at a staging area, where other rangers hauled me back to my feet. I told them I'd been cut off by a flare-up, that I barely escaped. They believed me. Hell, they had no reason not to. But I couldn't shake the thought that the fire had let me go. That the thing in the flames had chosen not to follow. The black ash fire burned for 12 days, before a storm finally drowned it. When the smoke cleared, the ridge was unrecognizable. Blackened earth, skeletal trees, silence where once there'd been life. Investigators called it one of the strangest burns on record, citing erratic winds, unusual fuel behavior, anomalies no one could fully explain. They wrote their reports, stamped them, filed them away, and everyone moved on. Everyone but me. Sometimes late at night I'll light a campfire in my yard, and as the flames crackle, I'll see shapes in them. A flicker of a skull, the bend of a shoulder, sparks flaring into eyes that stare back. And when the wind gusts, the fire will lean toward me, as though listening, waiting. I've heard old stories from locals since then. They talk about a spirit bound to the ridge, a firekeeper buried in legend, worshipped or feared by tribes who no longer live here. They say the ridge was its resting place, and when lightning split the forest, it woke. Some call it punishment, others a guardian. I don't know what it is. All I know is that it's still out there, waiting in the ashes, watching for the next spark. So if you ever fight a wildfire, and you see the flames move where they shouldn't, or hear a voice in the smoke calling your name, pray it's just the wind. Because if it isn't, if the fire has chosen to wake what sleeps inside it, then there's nothing you can do. You don't fight it. You don't contain it. You just hope it doesn't notice you. I've spent most of my career working winters in the northern parks, and if there's one truth I've learned, it's this. Snow remembers. You can cover the ground in a white sheet, hide the trails, bury the rivers, even level the trees under heavy frost, but the snow never forgets what's underneath. Footsteps linger, half vanished, long after the one who made them is gone. Shapes take form in drifts that look too much like faces, and sometimes if the wind hits just right, the snow carries voices. I used to tell myself it was imagination, but then I met him. The ranger who shouldn't have been there, the one who'd been dead for decades. It happened in January of 2018 during one of the worst storms I'd seen in years. I was stationed at Elk Hollow, a remote outpost that sits 20 miles from the nearest paved road. Most winters it's quiet, too cold for tourists, too much snow for casual hikers, but we still patrol, keep an eye on wildlife, monitor the cabins scattered along the trails for damage. That week, a blizzard had rolled through, dropping nearly 3 feet of snow in less than 48 hours. By the time it cleared, drifts were up to my waist, and the wind chill cut through every layer I owned. On the morning after the storm, I strapped on snowshoes and headed out to check Ranger's Rest Cabin. It was one of the oldest structures in the preserve, a log shelter built in the 1920s for rangers on long patrols. No one used it much anymore. Too far off the main trails, too drafty in winter. but part of my job was making sure it hadn't collapsed under snow load. The sky was sharp blue, sunlight bouncing off endless white. My breath hung in front of me like smoke. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, I had that tight feeling in my gut, the kind you get when you know something's waiting for you just out of sight. The trek took 3 hours. I followed the ridgeline, the silence broken only by the crunch of snowshoes and the occasional crack of ice splitting on the river. When I reached the cabin, I stopped short. There were tracks. Not fresh, not crisp, but recent enough that the wind hadn't erased them. Boot prints leading straight to the cabin door. At first I thought another ranger had beaten me there, but the station hadn't logged any patrols that morning, and the prints were strange. Old-fashioned boots, narrow with deep heel marks like the kind you'd see in photos from the 1940s. I crouched studying them, unease growing colder than the air around me. The cabin door was shut. I knocked out of habit, and when no one answered, I pushed inside. The place was as I remembered. Log walls dark with age, a bunk against one wall, stone fireplace cold and blackened with soot. But something was off. The air smelled faintly of tobacco smoke, sharp and dry, the way my grandfather's old pipe used to linger in his study. And on the table, set neatly in the center, was a ranger's hat. Wide-brimmed, felt. The old style they stopped issuing long before I was born. I didn't touch it. Instead, I called out, "Hello, anyone here?" My voice sounded too loud in the empty room. Silence answered. I shook off the chill crawling my spine and set about my inspection. The roof had held, the chimney was intact, the bunk was still sturdy. I told myself the tracks were just leftovers from a hunter or some nostalgic hiker wearing vintage gear. The hat was harder to explain, but maybe a prank, maybe a forgotten prop from one of those historical reenactment groups that sometimes rented the cabins in summer. I logged the visit in my notebook, shouldered my pack and headed back into the snow. But halfway down the ridge I heard footsteps behind me. I turned fast, heart kicking up. No one, just my trail of prints stretching back toward the cabin. I stood still, listening. The wind whispered through the pines. Snow creaked under shifting weight. Then there it was again, crunch, deliberate, a bootful. Only it didn't match my stride. It came between, slower, heavier, like someone was following just out of sight. I don't remember how fast I moved after that. My breath burned, frost stinging my cheeks, every instinct screaming to get back to the station before nightfall. When I finally stumbled through the outpost door, I slammed it shut and stood panting, ears straining for pursuit. Nothing, only silence, thick and suffocating. That night, I dreamed of the cabin. In the dream, the door swung open on its own, snow swirling inside. And standing there was a man in an old ranger's uniform. Khaki shirt, green wool pants, heavy boots. His face was shadowed under the brim of his hat, but his eyes glowed pale like moonlight on ice. He raised one hand as if to greet me, and when he opened his mouth, frost poured out instead of words. I woke shaking, the echo of cold still in my lungs. The next day I did some digging. Old files, yellowed photographs, ranger logs going back nearly a century. That's when I found him. His name was Ranger Thomas Hale. He'd worked Elk Hollow in the 1940s, a veteran, stern reputation by all accounts dedicated to the preserve. He'd died in 1949, caught in a blizzard while patrolling the very ridge I'd walked. They found his body days later, half buried in snow less than 100 yards from Ranger's rest cabin. Some said he'd been trying to make it back, but lost his way in the storm. Others whispered he'd made it to the cabin door but never crossed the threshold. I told myself the dream was just my mind filling in blanks, but I couldn't ignore the details. The uniform, the boots, the hat, all of it matched Hale, and the tracks, those deep heel marks, they were the same as in the old photos. The storm didn't end there. For the rest of that winter, every time I went near Ranger's Rest, strange things happened. Once I found fresh tobacco smoke curling from the chimney, though the fireplace was cold. Another time, I opened the cabin door to find snow inside, a drift piled neatly against the far wall, though the door had been shut tight. And always I felt eyes on me. The worst night was late February. Another blizzard had rolled in, visibility near zero, and I'd bunked at the cabin out of necessity rather than risk the ridge. I lit a fire, huddled in my bag, trying not to think about Hale. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of boots pacing the floor. Slow, steady, back and forth. My flashlight showed nothing, just shadows flickering on log walls. But when I rolled over, my blood froze. The old ranger's hat was on the bunk beside me. I didn't sleep again. I sat upright till dawn, staring at that hat, half expecting its owner to reach down and claim it. When morning came, it was gone. I finished my season at Elk Hollow, but I never went back to Ranger's Rest cabin alone again. Officially, I logged the site as structurally sound, low use, recommend continued monitoring. Unofficially, I told the next ranger in rotation not to spend the night there if he could help it. He laughed. They always laugh. But when I drive past in winter, snow swirling through the trees, I think of Hale. I think of those boot prints leading nowhere, of the voice in the wind that sometimes sounds too much like my name. And I know the snow remembers. So if you ever find yourself in Elk Hollow during a storm, and you see boot tracks where none should be, or catch the sharp scent of tobacco in the frozen air, turn back. Don't follow them. Don't step inside the cabin, because some rangers never leave their post, and in the snow duty lasts forever. I was assigned to Black Hollow Preserve in northern Montana, a stretch of dense pines and hidden valleys that doesn't get many visitors outside hunting season. Most of the work was quiet, clearing deadfall from trails, checking fire breaks, keeping an eye on wildlife. I loved it out there, the silence, the endless canopy, the sense that the world beyond had fallen away. But the preserve carried a reputation among the rangers. Old whispers. They said the tribes avoided certain valleys, called them silent grounds, places where even the birds refused to sing. I never put much stock in ghost stories. Until that autumn, the storm hit in early October, a freak system that tore through with winds over 70 miles an hour. Whole groves went down, roots yanked from earth itself torn open. The morning after, I headed out to assess damage. The forest was wrecked, trails obliterated, trees snapped like matchsticks, a raw gash carved into the hillside above Miller's Creek. It was there, climbing through the debris, that I noticed something strange. At first, I thought it was just another root ball, a tangle of earth and stone where a tree had toppled. But the soil was different, darker, richer, streaked with ochre clay that almost looked red. And in that clay, bones, human bones. They weren't scattered like an accident or burial by chance. They were arranged. Long bones stacked, skulls nestled together, ribs forming a lattice. Not a single body, but dozens, maybe hundreds, all layered, compacted, as if the hillside itself was a tomb. I froze there, breath fogging in the cold air, my mind clawing for an explanation. Pioneer graves? An old epidemic site? But the arrangement was too deliberate. And when I reached down, brushing soil from one skull, I felt carvings etched into the bone. Patterns, spirals, marks older than the forest itself. I reported it, of course. Protocol demanded it, but radio reception in the valley was dead after the storm, so I marked the spot and made for the outpost to file a report. The whole way back, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't walking alone. The woods were silent, yes, but it wasn't the peaceful silence I knew. It was tense, watching, like the forest was holding its breath. By the time I reached the station, night had fallen. The power was out, the generator dead, so I logged the discovery by lantern light. My hand shook as I wrote. I don't know why. Maybe because in the reflection on the window, I thought I saw movement behind me. Shadows twisting where nothing stood. 2 days passed before supervisors made it in. Roads were still blocked, so I stayed alone, circling back each day to check the site. Each time it was different. The first day the bones lay as I'd left them, clay still damp. The second, the arrangement had shifted, skulls facing outward, jawbones gaping wide like silent screams. I swore no one else had been there, no tracks in the mud but mine. The third day was worse. The bones were gone. Not all but most. Only shallow impressions remained, like they'd sunk back into the soil. And at the edge of the pit, pressed into the clay, were footprints. Bare, human, too large to be mine, too deep for a passing animal. That night, the dreams started. I saw fire in the valley, a ring of flames encircling figures in shadow. Voices chanted in a language older than English, words I couldn't grasp, but felt deep in my bones. And always at the center of the flames, the bones, glowing, writhing like they were alive again. I woke drenched in sweat, the taste of ash in my mouth. When the supervisors finally arrived, the pit was empty. Clean earth, no trace of remains. They nodded at my report, said storms uncover odd things, suggested maybe I'd mistaken animal bones. I didn't argue. Their eyes told me they didn't believe me, or maybe they didn't want to. Either way, they left and I stayed. The weeks after blurred into unease. The preserve changed. Birds abandoned the valley. Coyotes stopped howling at night. Even the wind seemed to avoid the hollow where the bones had been. And then there were the sounds. Whispers carried through the trees, faint but unmistakable. My name. Always my name. One patrol, I found a cairn on the ridge. Stones stacked with precision, a skull perched on top. Not bleached or old, fresh. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. By the time I returned with another ranger, the cairn was gone. I started to question my sanity. Lack of sleep, isolation, stress. But the scratches on the station door were real. Deep gouges that hadn't been there before. The smell of smoke was real too, drifting through the trees though no fires burned. And the figure I glimpsed one dawn standing among the pines watching. Tall, barefoot, cloaked in shadow. When I raised my radio, it vanished. The final night, the forest broke its silence. I'd gone to bed late, lantern low, trying not to think of the whispers outside. Sometime past midnight, a pounding started at the door, slow, rhythmic, like a drum. The lantern flickered, casting shadows that danced on the walls. My heart hammered as I grabbed my rifle, shouting a warning. The pounding stopped. Then came the voices. Not outside, inside, rising from the floor, the walls, the very soil beneath the cabin. Low chants in that same ancient tongue, vibrating in my chest until I thought my ribs would crack. I dropped the rifle, hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside me. The lantern blew out. The room fell dark. And in that darkness I saw them. Dozens of faces, pale as bone, carved with spirals of red light. Eyes hollow, mouths open in endless song. They circled me, closing in, their forms half earth, half shadow. At their center rose a figure taller than the rest, crowned in roots, bones woven into its chest like armor. Its hands stretched toward me, fingers long and sharp as antlers. I don't remember screaming. I only remember cold, so deep it burned, and the sensation of falling, sinking as though the ground itself had swallowed me. When I woke, it was dawn. I lay outside the cabin, snow dusting my clothes, the forest silent once more. The door stood open. Inside, the floor was bare, but on the wall, carved deep into the wood, was a spiral, the same pattern I'd felt on that skull weeks before. I put in for transfer the next day. They approved without question. I never went back to Black Hollow. But sometimes, when I'm alone on patrol in a different forest, I hear it. A low chant carried on the wind, faint but insistent. The ground remembers, and it waits. So if you ever hike in Black Hollow and come across soil streaked red after a storm, don't dig. Don't linger. Don't listen to the whispers in the trees, because what's buried there isn't meant for the living. And once it knows your name, the earth won't let you go.